I'm Ryan Gill from Gill's Primitive Archery, and we're just going to do a quick little tutorial on how I do my professional quality cane arrows. This is cane that I cut several months ago. I just cut it, growing in the wild, and let it dry. I don't do anything to it. I don't try to straighten it while it's still green. Let it completely dry. We pull off all this, all the leaf pieces, and set them aside, and then we'll get ready to straighten them out. Alright, now we got a couple of them peeled. We're working on straightening. And I like to use a little propane torch. It's a little faster for me than, say, like a candle. Doesn't leave as much carbon. Not that big of a deal what you use. Essentially, we just want to heat up small spots on the cane anywhere that it's bent. Keep turning the cane. Don't keep it in any one spot so it doesn't scorch on you. And we're just going to work up and down this shaft, finding any place that needs adjustment. We're going to straighten it out. Once it's heated and bent and cooled, it's going to stay. So that's one really good thing about cane. It stays once you put it in place. Get it as straight as reasonably possible just for the spining. It's still a very, very long shaft, much longer than our arrow is going to be. But we're going to straighten it one more time after we get it cut to size, spined, and a knot cut. Alright, what we have here is a spine tester, and this measures the amount of deflection in the shaft as it paradoxes around the bow. If you're building a professional quality set of cane or bamboo arrows, any sort of arrows, you need to use this. Now, in a true primitive set where you don't have a real spine tester, that's something that we can work around, but we're not going to cover that in this video. This is focusing on a very consistent professional set. This is going to be one of 9 that's going to be a set that's going to a customer probably in the next couple of days. So the spine tester, again, it measures the amount of deflection. Very important to have this. What we do is we set the shaft on here. The first node where one of the branches comes out, I face it away, as that's how we're going to align our nock later, and that we're going to measure the actual deflection of the side of the arrow that we're going to fletch to bend around the bow, if that makes any sense. So the arrow is always going to be nocked the same way every time, so we're going to measure it from that side. And the reason for the node, it just has always worked out better to put the node on top for me. I've gotten more consistent arrow flights in doing that. The node meaning where the little branch comes out, where the little leaf comes out of the cane. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the full length shaft on there. We don't want to cut it to length yet. We want to leave it full length because now we can slide it. It's got a big end, it's got a skinny end. If you need a heavier shaft, you can slide it down. If you need a lighter spine shaft, you can slide it to the skinny end. If you just cut them all to the length that you want to start with, you're stuck with whatever spine they are. Now we have some wiggle room. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this up, align our node correctly the way we want to do it, let everything level out, and then we're going to zero this and then hang our weight to measure our deflection. This is telling me, I know you can't see the numbers, that I got about a 53 pound spine. I'm looking for this customer's arrows, we're looking for about a 47. So we're going to slide this thing on down and re-zero it, and we're going to test it again. And that puts me right at about 47. That's what I'm looking for. So take a marker. I like to mark about an inch past on this side, on the nock side. That's just how I normally do it. It's not that big deal. Just keep doing the same thing every time and you'll be fine. And I have my standard length already marked out on the surface here that I'm working on. So I just align it and draw a line where my 2 cuts are essentially going to be. Now we can go ahead and cut this shaft to length, and we will have a 47 pound spine shaft cut to length. So all this stuff we don't need, but we'll actually save these pieces later, and I'll explain why. Alright, now we're go ahead and cut our nock end in, and here's that node we were talking about where the little branch comes out. That's going to face completely up. It's going to go up and down with the nock. Alright, now we're just going to clean this thing up to get it ready to fletch. What I have here is just an 1/8" file. And what I'm going to do is just clean out the nock that we rough cut with the saw. And we're going to go from both sides. Try not to get off course. And just bevel the edges just a little bit. Take a little bit of sandpaper. Round these edges. Make sure you get the inside. Clean those up. Take the sharp edges off because you don't want to be running the sharp cane edges over your string constantly. Okay, now just go ahead and sand right around this nock, just to get some of the. There's like a kind of a waxy sheath that's kind of on the end of this cane, and we need to take that off because we want our sinew to stick here. Same thing with here around where the fletching is, but we're going to take our knife and all these little lifted spots right around these nodes, just going to gently run back and forth just to cut them off. Then we can sand over that. Doesn't have to be perfect, you just want it smooth so it slides across the bow nice. But go ahead and take this rind off, just to rough it up with sandpaper. You don't have to do the whole thing. I actually don't like to do the whole thing. I like to leave that rind on this arrow. It naturally waterproofs it. This part we can kind of get away with because this is where we're going to fletch. We need everything to stick to it. Now, again, all these little lifted areas, just, you don't have to do anything crazy. Just knock all the high spots off. And that is really as simple as that is. And that smooths it out. If you want to take and just very gently make sure that there's no high spots on these nodes. Again, I don't recommend sanding the entire arrow. You know, the natural color of it makes for its own camouflage, which is nice. But that rind helps to waterproof everything. So that's pretty much it. We have a shaft that's straightened and ready to fletch. But one thing we will probably do is we're going to look down this one more time. I won't do it on camera because you saw me do it already, but we're going to really straighten this thing out as straight as we can get it. That big long shaft is hard to get perfectly straight. This one's going to be a little easier, so we're going to fine tune it and get it as absolutely straight as we possibly can. You'll never get all the wiggles out, but you want it as straight as you possibly can. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and cut some fletchings. I'll show you on this one. It's very important that you use, this is a turkey primary feather, a little heavier than the secondaries. This is what I like to use. It's very important that you use all the feathers from the same side of the wing. If you use, say, 2 feathers from the left side, one from the wings, or one from the right side, it's going to throw off the helical twist and you're not going to get proper arrow flight. So you must use all the feathers from the same side per arrow. It doesn't matter, you can switch different arrows. We can have one arrow that's all left wing and one arrow that's all right wing and it still fly good. It's just important that each arrow has only from one side. So what we're going to do is start from the bottom side. There's like a little rib that kind of runs down. In between this, I take a very sharp little paring knife and I basically just split this. It helps to have a very sharp, razor sharp shaving knife. If you try to use a dull knife or a thick knife, it's not going to shave through this properly. And we're not trying to shave it down perfectly. We just want to take the major high spots out of it. And I can usually get 2 fletchings per arrow, but not always. So now on this stick here, I have the measurements where I want it. Go ahead and snip the end off a little bit from the end. That's the length I want this shaft to be, or this fletching. We'll set that one aside. Go ahead and take it and pinch it between our 2 flat sticks, some 80 grit sandpaper, we're just going to sand it flat and thinner than it was. And have to be super thin. I like it to be a little bit rigid, but I want it about as thin as I can get it. But the idea is to have it perfectly flat, so when you stand it up, it lays completely flat on the table, standing upright. Then cut some spots for the sinew. I like about, maybe 3/8 of an inch or so. And I like to trim these edges off right here, the tips, because in flight they tend to flap and make a lot of noise. So I trim them off, and then I go ahead and I just cut these to the rough shape that I want, and now you're left with a fletching. So we'll do this a couple more times and we'll be ready to fletch that arrow. Alright, we have our 3 fletchings that we cut in our shaft, and this is a strip of back sinew from a white-tailed deer, and I do not like to pound it. I know a lot of people do. I like to leave it in it's all stuck together. But what I do is use my fingernails and I separate a piece off. And I pull it, just clean it off and set that aside. And then what I like to do is actually chew this to get it softened up to wrap. You can just soak it in water, but legitimately chewing it makes it more pliable, and your saliva starts to break down the glue a little bit more, the natural glues that are already in this, and it helps bind everything together better. I'll set this one down because I've actually got a couple already chewed up, ready to go. If it grosses you out and you want to soak it, go for it. If you want to be a real primitive archer, chances are you probably need to just learn to chew it, because it just doesn't get any better, quite honestly. So I start from the fat end, and what I'm going to do, find this node, and we're going to face it up, and we're just going to lay the one fletching right down on it, perpendicular to the knock. Okay, just 1 or 2 little wraps on there. You don't need to get crazy. Now I work around, and this takes practice. I'm sure I make it look really easy. To space them out, you eventually get an idea as to just what you're looking for. And then I put a couple wraps on it, and then I want to look down it and make sure that they don't need any adjusting. If they do, work them over a little bit, and that's a good start for the 3. And then I go ahead and just wrap this all the way to the tip, or to the knock end, sorry, and then right back. And you can usually, this is an extra long piece, don't need to have it necessarily that long. And then we just turn it into itself a couple times. And now I take Type Bond 3 wood glue. And the reason I use this is very customer friendly. It does not come apart when it gets wet. So somebody shoots into the wet ground with this, it's not going to come apart on them. And basically what I'm doing is just putting a little bit of glue at the base, right along the bottom of each one of these feathers. Doesn't have to be perfect. You don't want a huge amount of glue, but you want enough that it's going to actually do some good. Again, it just takes some practice. So once you've glued it, take your other piece of sinew out of your mouth here, and just a little bit of helical twist in this. I like to do 2 of them at once. I pinch that in there and get these 2, and then catch the 3rd one as I come around, and then suck it up kind of tight, and then just 1 or 2 quick wraps, and then we can just check our spacing all the way around. Make sure you look down it so you can see the helical twist in the feathers. See, spaced out pretty well. And then we're just going to finish this off. Nice, even wrappings. till it's all pulled tight, wrapped in well. Okay, now what I have here is a pre-cut piece of just artificial sinew. It's just some thin stuff. This is only temporary. We're not putting this on, but it's waxed so it doesn't stick to any glue. We're just going to wrap it around here a couple times to make it stick, and then we're going to very gently weave it through the feather. And you need to have these even as you go around so it doesn't pull your feather all funky. It doesn't have to be perfect. Like I said, this is just temporary. What this is doing is, and we're snugging it up, is we're forcing the feather to the shaft where we just glued. And if you get in any troubled spots, you can, put a couple extra wraps in there if you need to. You just spiral wrap this feather all the way up. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect, but you don't want it horrible where it's yanking your feather every direction, because this is going to come out afterwards. Okay, and we've got a little bit of sinew standing up, so we'll just go ahead and pinch that down with that as well. Just turn it, no need to tie it. And then we are going to just go around it, adjust, look down it, make everything as close to even as possible. So I like to look at it and turn it, and if I notice that one side is sticking out, like oh yeah, I got a wide side, then you can just make your adjustment, because it can still slide around. If you need to, you can push around the bottoms, but this one's looking pretty good. So essentially this one is ready to dry. We're going to set it up, let it dry for maybe an hour or two, and then we'll come back and finish it up. Alright, our arrow is still drying, but what we're doing, these little leftover pieces that we cut off that cane shaft we're not using, do this carefully. Take your knife and just split them. And what essentially I'm doing here is I am making skewers. And yes, they are handy for when you want to do little mini kebabs on the grill, but we're going to use these in the tip end of our arrow. So essentially we're going to go ahead and just split a few of these out, different sizes. I like some thin ones, I like some thick ones, whatever you kind of come up with. Because some people ask me if I use 4 shafts. I do not use 4 shafts on customers' arrows. They're too brittle when it comes down to it. Customers want a good robust arrow, as do I. And this is the best way to add weight and strength to the front of your arrow. So now we'll get rid of that. And essentially we have the open end of this arrow shaft, and it goes down in here only so far to where this node is. Now ideally I like to have at least a few inches. This one's acceptable. Before you run into this node that stops it. If it happens to be like right here or really close and the other one's not too far behind it, then I'll run a drill down in and hollow that out. The same size drill bit as this, as the opening. On this one you wouldn't want to do it, because then you'd have this whole thing to fill up, and it's going to be very hard to do with all these skewers. It's possible, but it is unnecessary, and it's going to change the spine of your arrow. Or if you just do the tip, it's not going to change the spine of your arrow, but it's going to add about 20 to 25 grains on average, and then it's also going to add a lot of strength into the tip. So again, we use the Titebond wood glue, and I like to just start filling a little bit. Sometimes you can get it to run down depending on how big the hole is. Just getting a good start on it, that's all. Take a couple of these skewers, bunch them together, and work them down in there. One little trick you can do if you don't have enough glue is paint the sides of the skewers with some more glue. If I can get the bottle to cooperate. That'll help carry some more down with it, and you can just kind of work it back and forth a little bit. Little excess never hurt anybody. And same thing, just work this kind of up and down and back and forth. Get good glue coverage as you're poking these things in. But you essentially want to get them as tight as you can. Try not to run any skewers up through your fingers. Okay? And you just want to take up any spots possible, because if you don't get enough glue in there, these things when you tap them on stuff will rattle, and it's not the end of the world. but it's not ideal. It doesn't seem to hurt anything, but plenty of glue, and fill up every tight space you can. If they rattle a little bit after they're dry, it's fine. I don't like them to. That's just personal preference. So now that one's done. It's stuffed. So what we can do now, let this dry a little while. It doesn't take real long. In fact, you can really do it right now. It doesn't matter. We'll take this in on the saw and we'll just cut that off flush. No big deal. And it's done. And then we'll come back and we'll add some more glue to this fletching here in just a minute. Alright, this is it's dry enough. It doesn't have to cure out real hard. You just don't want it to come the glue to separate. So what we're doing is just unwinding the artificial sinew that we put in. It doesn't stick. Like I said, it's waxed. Comes right off. Unwind it. I actually save these because I use them over and over and over again. It's not that important. What I'd like to do, use this time to just true up any parts of the feather that really stand out from the rest. You know, if you got a little bit of a high spot or one that's a little higher than the other or something, you can use that time to just kind of trim them out a little bit. Now, what we're going to do is take the Type on 3 again, and just on, I like the inside of the fletching to glue because it's got a little bit more meat along the base. And I just run a tiny bead right up. If a little bit gets on the feather, it's not the end of the world. If you find a spot that looks like it's actually got a gap, just put a little bead of glue there. That's all it takes, okay? Then we're just going to put a couple dabs along the base of the sinew and a little bit up at the top. And then take your finger and I work that into that sinew real good. Same thing with around the knock end. This will lock everything down. It's not going anywhere. And then I take my finger and just wipe the excess, and while I wipe the excess I push any more glue underneath the feather in case it's got some space in there, but typically just doing this once is enough to lock everything down. Like I said, if you get a little bit of glue on it, it's not the end of the world. Just wipe it off with your finger and just keep going. It actually, once it dries, you'll never notice it's there. It doesn't affect anything. And that's pretty much it. So now we'll let this dry, and we already cut this end off after we plugged it. So we'll taper this and glue a point on, and then this arrow will be done as soon as this is dry. So all we did was bevel that edge down, and it's already filled, remember? This adds a little bit of strength to it. We just bevel it down. I do them all by eye, and we can just glue a field point on, make sure it spins true, and it's ready to go. And here we have our fully finished cane arrow, nice and straight, spined, and we're going to make a whole another set so we can get these off to a customer. Now unfortunately I do not sell arrow making supplies. I only sell finished product. I can hardly keep myself in supply of the materials. But if you're looking for finished arrows, a nice match set, probably the best set that you're going to be able to get anywhere, visit GillsPrimitiveArchery.com.